good dog, and the guy's saying good dog, Ralph, good dog, and the dog's thinking, why is there always good dog and not great dog? It's always like that. I'm sitting on the chair today. Okay. Good luck figuring out where you are on that scheme of things. Okay, before we begin, I'm going to begin a few times so that, is that on? I'm going to begin a few times so that eventually when everybody's here we can, sort of deal with everything. The first thing I want to say is that your book reviews are due, I think it's the 9th of November? 14th. Oh, sorry. 14th of November. I want to be very clear what a book review is so that you have no illusions of grandeur on this. I'm first going to start with what a book review is not, or what a book review that we're doing here is not. You are not writing for the New York Times. It is not, nobody cares whether you like the book. Okay, so you don't need to ever mention whether or not you like the book. It's irrelevant. If you find yourself saying, I like the book, start again. Okay? If you find yourself saying, I couldn't relate to the book, or anything about your opinion is irrelevant. Okay? What you're meant to be doing is figure out what the argument is and make it come to life. Show how that argument happened. And that's what you have to do. And you have to do it, hopefully, in 1,500 words or less. It's very hard to write short things. So if you need to go over 1,500 words, you can, but don't go over like by 10,000. I mean, it's meant to get you to think about a thing called the gist. Have you ever heard of the thing called the gist? If I say a gist, just give me the gist. Yeah. Where's that green pen? Where'd it go? Oh. Okay. So basically what the argument is this thing called the gist, G-I-S-T. And the gist means, literally, what, in a shorthand way, is being said, what's being said. When I worked for the State Department, which I think I've mentioned to you before. Have I mentioned? Oh, right. Anyway, I worked for the State Department. Okay, so, and I was working with Kissinger, which was also interesting. And I was being trained as a diplomat, which obviously didn't work. Just kidding. Anyway, there was a thing that the State Department had called the gist sheets. And every day you were expected to go look at the gist of things. And it was the gist sheets on every country in the world and every place in the world. And you'd pick it up and it'd give you the sort of rundown in 5 sentences of what you needed to know. So the other thing to think about is this thing called the need to know. It's a very specific, I'm sorry to teach you CIA stuff, but anyway, it's a very specific thing called the need to know law. The need to know law, which is not what I'm asking you about the book review, the need to know law basically says, if I tell you something that you don't need to know, you know that I could be a spy. Or you know that I could be a leak. Because there's no reason, for example, that you need to know that at one point the American military was trying to deal with the Panama Canal scenario, and they agreed, the Congress agreed, that the Panama Canal should be given back to the Panamanians. Now, in fact, the reason they agreed to this was because the U.S. military, the Navy, had gotten all this money to build nuclear submarines, and they built the ship 1 foot too wide, and it couldn't fit through the canal, which is fantastic as an argument, so it was presented as all this other stuff that was going on, but in fact, what was actually going on was this other thing. Now, did you need to know this story? No. So that I told you this story means that, first of all, you're culpable. You now know something that you don't need to know. what are you going to do with that information? Anyway, it's declassified, so don't worry. But that's what a spy is. That's what, not a spy, that's what a leak is. So giving you the gist, knowing what the gist is of something, is to say, what's the kernel? What's that little bit that I need to know? Now there's another word for it, there's a mathematical word for that. And that mathematical word starts with an A. You know what it is?
Atom?
No?
No.
A.
Atom?
No, not atom.
Ocean?
No. Mathematical.
Zinc.
No. Close.
Not algebra.
Nope.
Oh, you're hanging us.
B?
S. Oh. Well, I got a head and a leg.
Yeah,
Wow.
sorry.
You got to write it so we don't do it again.
That was harsh. What?
You have to write S, otherwise we might do it again.
No.
Yeah.
I'm playing the game. Okay.
I.
Put a shoe on.
O. Algorithm. So.
Algorithm. Right. Except I didn't spell it right. Algorithm. I was thinking of something else. I was thinking of something else. I forgot what I was thinking of. But anyway, algorithm. An algorithm is the gist of something. So now you know how to make that thing. Now, so we're just talking about the book review. Those you. Did you sign it yet, Millie? Okay. Does everyone know everyone's name so far? Has everyone signed this? That's the main thing. Has everyone signed it? Signed it? Signed it? Millie hasn't signed it. Can you pass it back? Oh, Maria, can you open the window without breaking the frame? Well done. So we're missing Mark. Where happened to Mark? Where's our Mark? Okay. Thank you, George. Okay. In case you don't know people's names, now you know where everybody's sitting. Okay. So there's no excuse. Can everybody read this sort of? Okay, good. Right. Okay. So the book review, due the 14th. 1,500 words or less. A little bit more if you can handle it. If you have footnotes, so here's the other thing. I cannot bear the idea of plagiarism trials. There's an obsession with a lot of universities, and luckily this one is not as bad as most, where they have this thing called Turnitin. And what happens is that, I think technically you're supposed to do a Turnitin here, but it's ridiculous. Anyway, so you turn for your PhD, you have to do Turnitin, which is insane. But anyway, you hand in the thesis or your paper, and they run it by a computer, and the computer looks to see whether or not I can find anything that is problematic, that you've copied somehow. There's leather. You want to sit there? I arranged that neatly so that somebody could sit there. And yet, there are things in it. Okay. Now, here's what happens if you're plagiarizing with me. You come in, if I think you've plagiarized, which I doubt would be the case, I ask you what you said, I turn your paper over and tell it to me. If you can't do it, I consider it plagiarized. Okay, so that's very simple. I mean, I'm not going to go back and look and see and find and this and that, so, but you're not going to do it. And the more important thing is, there are very interesting writers like Kathy Acker, for example, who copied lots of things. In fact, she was taken to court because she copied whole novels and put them in her novel. Right? Okay, you might want to not go that far. So footnoting is very important. And so I just want to take a moment to say that the footnoting style I would like you to use is called the Chicago style. That is because the other one called the Harvard style, which looks like this. It looks like this is not to do, the not one. Don't do this, okay? So you're writing along, da 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 da, and then you say, George, pretend that's your last name, okay? George, 2013, page 5, and then you continue writing. Do not do that. That's called the Harvard method. It's a sociological method. Wonderful for sociology, fantastic for anthropology, but for artists, for philosophers, for literary people who don't want to be interrupted when they're reading, you don't want this. You want a little tiny discrete little number, 1. Okay? Then the other thing is to remember, so I don't have to keep correcting it with you, and I can assure you that you can get things rejected because of this, like PhDs. If you do a writing, you're writing, then you have a full stop or a period or whatever you call it over here. Then you have the number, okay, 1 or 2, right? You don't have the sentence, the number, and then a full stop. So the number goes on the other side of the full stop. This might sound really OCD, and probably it is, but I can tell you that you'll get used to it after a while. Other thing to remember, don't put any footnotes in the middle of a sentence. This is not a medical exam. And don't do 2, 3, 4 either. Okay? Just one footnote at the end of a sentence. One footnote at the end of a thought, basically. When do you footnote? You footnote on 2 reasons. One is because you're quoting something, so it gets a footnote. And secondly, because you're paraphrasing. Actually, there's 3 reasons. And the third reason is because if you went in the direction that you could, let's say you're writing something, you think, okay, the guy is saying, the gal is saying 2 different things. I'm going to go this way with my argument, but we could really go that way. You put a footnote. It's called a referential footnote. Referential footnote. And a referential footnote means, 1. So you're writing along, da 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 da, and you put your thing. So footnote number 2, let's say, and you go down to the bottom of the page, 2, and you say, this argument is going to be developed totally differently above, but if you want to see how it's developed in 17 other ways, go see that. That's what you do. Okay, that's called a referential footnote. And what that does is it does 2 things to the person reading. It lets them know, you know more than you are letting on. And so you don't lose any points. And secondly, when you actually get to the stage of, for anybody who wants to go into writing, wants to go into making novels, any of that kind of thing, not that there are not footnotes in novels very often, but it allows you to get a sense of the breadth of things. It just allows you to expand and be more poetic. Also, the font size should be either an 8 or a 9, and the font size up here should be a 10 to 12. Don't do smaller than 10. I need to read it. I got glasses. I will be in a bad mood. Don't do bigger than 12. It looks like filler. Otherwise, everything is fine. Double space. Okay. And have normal margins so that it's not like so close to the edge you can't like reading it. Okay? Clear? All clear? Yeah? Good, good, good.
For the book review, would you expect footnotes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if you quoted from it. And then you say, let's say the book review you're doing is on, which one, who was doing Mouse? Are you doing Mouse? Yeah. Let's say it's on Mouse. So it first starts, when you footnote, you put the first name first, so, what's his name? Art Spiegel, Spiegel, I think. Spiegel, comma, Mouse, My Father Bleeds, History, or whatever the book is called, volume 1, and then you say, comma, then you say city, of where it's published, publisher, comma, date of publication, close parenthesis, comma.
Is that before we've written anything?
That's right. See, this is how you can get 1,500 words so fast. Page, 10, full stop. If it's more than one page, 2 P's, full stop, 10 to 15, something like that. Next time you do it, because obviously you're only going to be reviewing one book, so it'll click clearly, you don't do all this again. You simply say either mouse, and you underline it, or you say Spiegel, comma, mouse, page 32. Something like that.
You not say ibid.
No. The reason you don't say ibid, I mean, that's a very old way of doing it, which is not necessarily wrong, but the reason it's not usually done anymore is because it allows you to very quickly read the footnotes. A lot of times the footnotes are not located near the pages. In this case, they will be. So you just get into a better sort of habit. The other thing is that the other thing to avoid is don't do this. Don't say, okay, footnote number 1, you paraphrase something and you say, well, that was from pages 10 to 12. And then footnote number 2, you paraphrase something and that's from pages 20 to 23. And then footnote number 4, and so you keep going up the road, as it were. That's considered plagiarism too, believe it or not. Because all you've done is basically distilled the thing and written it exactly the same. So if nothing else, pretend you're throwing up a bunch of cards and they lay down, so that you say page 35 to 36 is the first thing you do, and then you footnote page 1. Go, because you're putting together the argument. The argument should be in the shape of a sphere, not in the shape of a line. It's not chronology, so it's, even though the book starts at one end and goes to the other, so it looks like it's a line, in fact, it's rounded, and you don't need to go in a line. That will be considered, once you get out of the MA, in fact, even in certain universities, like if you're at the Russell groups or whatever, they would be obsessed about this kind of thing. So just so you know, it's considered a form of plagiarism, even though you're footnoting. Even though you're saying, here's where my source is, but because you're going like that, it's considered a form of plagiarism. Any questions you have, run it by me first. You know, I will be happy to look at your drafts. Everyone know what books you're working on? Yeah.
Possibly negative dialectics.
That's something relaxing. Okay. Okay.
Well, you can give, well, overall, I was going to go back. I was considering Hegel, and I was like, okay.
Well, we haven't done That's right. Okay, good. So everybody's okay. Good. Second thing I want to have is a conversation. I was worried about what was going. First of all, are there any questions about the book review?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Handing on 14th.
Yes.
The Thursday.
Right.
How does that work? I mean, do we?
The way it works
if,
is just put it in my mailbox or pigeonhole or whatever it's called.
and what if it?
What if
I'm
it
not saying
isn't there?
it is, but what if it involves a presentation or a talk or something?
What do you mean?
Well, if I want to do a book review as part of a talk or kind of give a.
You still have to have words.
Yeah, sure.
They have to be on a page.
And which order would that happen? So would I hand in the physical documents and then do it
Yes.
at a later stage, or?
Well, I hadn't thought about that, so I would say at the moment, what I'm really trying to get you guys to do is learn how to make an argument, and how to make an argument by using words on a page, because it's a very different skill, basically. So while you can do a presentation, and in fact you can do it, you know, probably it depends on what book are you doing.
Okay, good.
Kierkegaard. So there would be another time when we could go to Kierkegaard. You could like give that.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's definitely what I'm doing. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I would say just. I know it's nice to punch above one's weight, but just try and just do the actual thing. It is very specific assignment, not to torture you, but to get you to be in shape, as it were, to get you to be, you know, as though you were, you know, I don't know, going for a marathon. And there's certain things you need to learn, and one of them is how to make this algorithm, this gist, this argument. Any other questions?
Are we supposed to be referencing like other people's
No.
literature?
it's just literally that text alone.
Yeah. So, yes, so that's it.
No referential footnotes saying see also.
Yeah, you can do that if you want. Yeah, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. That you'd want to do in the bigger essay,
Yeah, of
in
course,
the
yeah.
killer essay. But this one is just to get your little feet wet, to see. Now, some of you who haven't written in 1,000 years, and it's like you're just like, ugh. I would suggest looking at even a fragment of something. Like, for example, so that you don't do the entire negative dialectics, you might just do the first section. Sadly, or you can sit on the leather. Okay.
Yeah, I suppose it is quite difficult to fit that into what's the limit, 1,500 words.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it, but
Yeah,
it's difficult.
But it's going to be
You really need to already
Skip.
know it at that point. Okay, any other questions?
So you're saying we can kind of go and focus on a part of the book.
Yeah, but talk to me first. If you're doing Kierkegaard, you can't do that, because we've spent a couple of sessions on
Yeah.
it. But if you're doing, like if you're doing Hegel, for example, you could do one of the sections. Like, for example, Consciousness A, or the preface, which is enough to, in fact, you could do like just a couple of things, because it's a very tough slog. And I'd rather you get it right the little bit that you're doing than some sort of generalized thing that ends up being like an undergraduate piece of work. So, no disrespect to the undergraduates, but you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I really want you to think, what does it mean to be talking this language? What is this thing? Any other questions? And just come see me if you have a question. If the book you've chosen, you're looking at it going, I don't know why I chose this stupid book, you know, or whatever it is, or somebody wanted to work on Bataille, Visions of Excess. Who is that? Are they here today? Oh yeah, hello, hiding in the back. Yes, all good, but Visions of Excess, as you know, has many different stories in it, so you might want to focus on, I don't know, Solar Anus, or the Big Toe, or something like that within there, because it's just, because I really want you to figure out how an argument is made that is a conceptual argument that allows you to think materially about something. That's what's behind this little challenge. Okay. Any other questions?
Are there any general kinds of books, background sorts of books we could look at?
Probably.
You don't suggest?
I don't recommend any of those things. I think they're a bunch of interesting things, not interesting enough for us. And the reason I say that is because I want people to learn to trust the way in which you can put something together. So give yourself time. That is the main thing you need. Read the book or read the fragment or whatever it is many, many times. Not once, not twice, but 10 times, 15 times. Oh, and Andre, can you show them how to use the voice? Can you show that now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, for those of you that have an iPad and felt tortured about the reading, I will explain this in a second. But you know, you can actually have the iPad read you the story or the thing that you're reading, and that's fantastic, because then if you're having problems focusing on reading, which a lot of us have, it will read out loud to you. So here you go. You're on.
iBooks. Product of a nocturnal disturbance which has no psychical value. For what could we expect to derive from investigating it that would be obvious for our purposes?
It's going to take some getting used to listening to it. It's going to take some getting used to
That's right.
listen to some of it.
But I'm just thinking, if you heard it going on in the background while you're actually reading, it might be
How did you
helpful.
actually do that?
I beg your pardon?
How did you actually do that?
Well, it's in settings, but I think if you just,
I know.
if
I
you
was like,
just
that's
tap,
useless.
You hit it three times. John,
Yes,
there's
I'm
a
getting
chair.
used to
There's a
that.
chair here.
um,
There's a chair here, and
tap
there's also
tap
leather.
it 3 times.
It's leather.
That should start.
Okay.
Tap it 3 times on when you open the book up.
Just on the home button. It takes some getting used to.
You can sign this. Have you signed it? Sophie? No. You each signed it, haven't you? What'd you say? I didn't see your name. What did you sign?
Pointing at the wrong end.
Here's Sophie. Here's Blanca.
Yasmin.
I just want to mention that I'm worried about everybody and their ability to understand conceptual space. This is a very interesting problem. Okay, you're here, right? Did you sign it here?
Yeah.
Okay, now. I guess that's right, except, see, Maria is at the end, right? Then Blanca, right? You're Blanca, right? You're Maria. Right, Maria, Blanca, Yasmin. So Yasmin is next to Maria. Now, this is not to embarrass you, it's just to say that it's very weird, it's very interesting trying to figure out space. So also, you're trying to trick me, because I knew that you weren't Blanca. I was trying to think, okay, what is this now? Okay, the other big sign, what happened to John? What is it?
Can I just ask you again? Yes. You open up the text and then you press it 3 times.
Press it 3 times and then open up the book app, and then it should start
So
reading.
press it 3 times actually opens the book app.
No, press the home button 3 times, and then that opens up the. Yeah, when you're in the home page, press the button 3 times, and then that opens up the speech dictated sort of app, Siri, whatever it's called. And then you open up the book app.
You might need to go into settings as well.
Okay, so we're not going to take time doing this, but afterwards we will take more time to do it. Okay, afterwards you can stop by when you finish. Okay, the next thing I want to do, and then we turn the lights off. I was worried about last week. It was a experiment which I thought went horribly wrong. Okay, so as I said to the PhD group the next day, it's been like knife in the head. I don't know what I did wrong. It was a disaster. Anyway, and that is because I don't want you to feel embarrassed about reading aloud. But there's 2 things. One is that if you don't want to do anything, just don't do it. It's really okay. There's not a big issue. Nobody's going to think badly. But the reason I ask you to read aloud, and especially with gusto and energy, is that it turns out you hear more through, or you see more through your ear. You become attuned to how one actually delves into what is actually very difficult work. And you know, we could discuss, like, for example, doubt. I was having this discussion earlier with Wendy about the question of doubt and how easy you might think that it is about, not that she thought this because she didn't, but that doubt could be considered against understanding, like having, you know, I don't think what you're saying is completely correct, that form of doubt. So when you start realizing that it's actually a much more complex scenario, which has to do with edges and limits and these kind of things, to hear it said many times is the key. I found that just as a pedagogical experience, I found that that is actually what is the trick. Not that there is necessarily a trick or one key, but in order to bring you from, and this is not said in a disrespectful way, but to bring you from crayons to perfume. And what I mean by that is that you begin to understand really how dangerous philosophy is, and really how dangerous it is for you to start thinking. First of all, you got to get through all the mud and gook that's been happening with you guys so that you stop thinking, or that you don't think you can think, or that you don't think you're intelligent, or whatever the story is. You know, who knows how it was beaten out of you, but it basically is beaten out of you. And so you have to learn very slowly in these little baby steps, and these baby steps are reading aloud. Now, we're all in this together. Nobody is stupid in this class. You got into an MA program because you're intelligent, so don't worry about being intelligent. You are intelligent. Just everybody gets an A, okay? So just don't worry about it. We're here to experiment. We're here to play. We're here to learn how you actually learn. So that's the key about reading, okay? And there's other keys we'll learn, but we'll experience as we go through this. But I worry because last Tuesday I was very, very tired, and not you have to say that, you know, because I'm involved in this horrible thing called REF. You know, small I to everybody. The REF, has anybody heard of the REF other than me and like 3 other people? The REF is this thing called the Research Excellence Framework, where you have to write up all these millions of reports to make sure that this university is understood, right now it's got a status of 4-star, which just sounds like you're in La La Land, but anyway, we're in 4-star. And in 4-star world, that means this place is world class. And if you're rated world class, it's very rare for a university that's not a Russell group, that is say Oxford or Cambridge or one of those types, to get a 4-star. So bizarrely, or for whatever reasons, BIAD got a 4-star. So in order for us to maintain it, that means you get millions of pounds. This is really what it always comes down to money, right? You know, you get a lot of money and all this stuff. So I'm having to go to these meetings every 5 minutes. This is why I keep missing all your studios. And like I was like, oh, sorry. Well, it'll be over with by October 31st, or like, I would just give up. But so I was very tired on last Tuesday because we'd had meeting after meeting after meeting. And then after the last meeting, this is like, and I'll finish with this, they changed the forms. It was just like, it was just completely unbelievable. Anyway, so you can imagine, you know, filling out forms by committee already is just intoxicatingly fun. And then when you find out that the form was wrong, it's just like, wow, this is incredible. And then I went in to talk to you about the secrets. And I know that it's very hard for you to read. You're new at this. You're young at this. You're young. I don't care what your age is. You're young scholars. You have a young brain. And so I allow you to rest a little bit while I'm giving you the lectures so that you can, because to dive into it straight away, you wouldn't get a thing. You know, I mean, it would just, it might still be doing that, but at least on some level might go in an eye and come out an ear or something and go in there. So I usually prepare a very, not serious lecture, but there's something in there that you can grab onto and sort of as a little life raft. But I didn't do that on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I sort of gave you what would normally go as a PhD kind of thing. And I think it kind of backfired on one, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, maybe, but I had a feeling it didn't work as well as it could have. So if you had that feeling too, don't despair. You know, we can all do, you know, kind of group hug later, but I mean, I just want to make sure that you don't feel that this is anything other than your space, because God knows it's tiring just doing this stuff on your own. You know, so I want you all to be at the same level or better than I am, and let me tell you, that's a high level, okay? So I'm expecting you to get there at some point in your life. And to do that, we only have a certain amount of time to get you sort of there, as it were. So please, if you have any worries, any fears, anything that you think that, you know, is not working right, tell me. I won't be able to understand it by like just staring at you. You know, and don't feel like in any way that I'm trying to either, you know, select you out or, you know, I select all of you out. I can never remember everybody's names, or in fact, I often can't remember anybody's name, but that is basically because I love you all equally. Okay, so it kind of doesn't matter what your name is really in a certain sense. Okay, so it really is on that level. That's why we have this chart, so I can like very carefully go, yeah. Okay. Any questions about that? Because I really want to make sure that, was I right that it was too crazy last week? You did? Okay. Well, I know that there was, let's say, a small but not insignificant small group that found it either annoying or it didn't quite work. And I just want to make sure that if that is the case, you can talk to me, like, don't suffer in silence. Yeah? Yeah. Question? No question. Okay. Question. Everybody okay? Okay. It's fine. We're all good?
I kind of had a question.
Oh, good!
Because when we've been talking about exiting, and
Yes.
like the limitations of the telos and everything, and so this character that we were reading about was in this intense pain
Yes.
and looking for an exit. But the exit looked as bad as where she was.
Yes.
Um,
What happened? Is she okay?
she just
Go on.
that was the difficult thing, was that where she was so painful, and where she went was maybe even worse.
Right.
So
Yes, and that's true. and part of that was to get people to think, well, the exit isn't always as much fun as it's, you know,
Was it even an exit or was it a cul-de-sac?
it's cul-de-sac. Yeah, it wasn't an exit. Didn't work as an exit. Certainly didn't work as an exit. Yeah.
Self-harm, I suppose, they're just bringing the pain from a certain area to a new area.
Yes.
Well, there's some people who self-harm, not that I'm advocating self-harming, but some people who do self-harm because it's a release. It's a very different issue.
I suppose the students aren't dealing with people who self-harm, are trying to cover, this is not my only knowledge of
Yeah.
such students who come to you and tell you about horrible stories from their personal life, and you say, and this is what I do to myself. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Counselor.
Yeah. No, it's difficult. But I mean, these kind of things are very complex, and they're difficult. That's why I'm worried about Sophie. I hope she's okay. You know, so if she's not okay, then we need to because this is very heavy stuff that is happening. So we have to help each other get through it in this kind of thing. Okay, enough of my speech. Shall we turn the lights off then? Or do you want it bright? You're okay with the lights going down? Okay, is that light on next to you, Anita?
Should be on.
Okay, just, thanks, George. Try not to.
I'm not gonna.
Okay. Okay. Today. Dog.
Oh, sorry. Never mind, sorry.
Okay, we're all good to go? Okay, I asked you to look at Freud. Now, for some of you, the Freud thing was basically set up in a way that I didn't tell you what pages to read, none of that kind of thing. It was just a very general kind of thing. Because I wanted you to just, wherever you could dip into it, to kind of try and get into it. So I want to explain to you some very basic things about Freud that I hope will give you kind of a window to why Freud is interesting or not for you. Okay, so the first thing to understand about Freud is that Freud was probably the first, but certainly one of the first, who understood that perception is about projection. That was the very first thing to understand. So that when you're thinking about how something happens and that how you, quote, understand something, the understanding isn't that it goes into your head, the understanding is that your head projects. If there's a thing at all that's going on. So you have this kind of moment. Now, that was kind of interesting because usually people before that were saying things like, well, the ego or the conscious or the unconscious or something was all sort of inside. But what Freud was saying was that it was this way in which something got thrown out onto the, let's say, the table. And it was always a social thing. It was always a collective thing. There was always something that was going on that made it so that it was a language exchange. So that kind of thing. That's the first thing. So the second thing is that he made the argument that this was a science and not, well, and not like an opinion. So he was using science in a kind of broader sense of the notion of scientia, or a way in which one would understand the relationship between knowledge and doing something that wasn't just an opinion. So that's that. So in his scenario of making these claims that knowledge could be a science, what was meant by that was not so much that you could rarefy it or you could make it sterile, but rather that you could reproduce it in moment two. So the idea that you can do something and then do it again, so you do something and do it again, it's not by accident that it happens, it's not by just so happen that you're walking and a lightning bolt hits you and you think, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll do that for my, let's say, art project or my piece of work. It's not that it happens completely by accident, but that there's something that's able to be repeated. Now, it's not so clear cut like the number 5, like saying 5, 5, 5, I can repeat this, I can repeat this, I can repeat this, but rather that there's a way in which something is able to make sense. And when I say make sense, I mean it actually creates sense. It creates the sensibility of something, it creates the fabric of something, it creates the materiality of something. So that's kind of important. Now, he made the argument that this was established in the child in phases. The first phase is called the oral phase, one of my favorites. Second phase is the anal phase, A-N-A-L, anal phase. Third phase, the Oedipal phase. Everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're all okay? We're all good to go? That's right. Just all very dramatic. Are you sure everything's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So we're on anal, oral, and Oedipal phases. We'll be happy to know.
Okay.
Okay. The 3 of you. Okay. So let's just discuss what happens. A child is born. It's very exciting, especially if you happen to be that child. Okay, it's very nice. And the first thing that the child does, other than scream its little head off, is it gets something, the pleasurable thing, according to Freud, that happens, is that the child sucks on the breast. Or the child sucks on a nipple of some kind that has milk attached to it. So the very first thing that the child experiences in terms of pleasure, or to put it slightly differently, the very first thing that the sensuousness of the child does, because obviously they're crying, they're screaming, they're cold, there's lots of things that go on, they're bloody, they need to be cleaned off, but the very first sensuous thing that happens is that the taste of that nipple and the milk that's coming out. And the child, according to Freud, says to itself, I am me and you are me. You are you, and I am you. We are the same being. So that mother is called the love object, or whoever takes on the mother role. Can be a guy, can be a girl, can be anybody. It can be someone. Whoever is in that nurturing role is the love object, and that love object person, from the point of view of the child, is the same person. The child makes no distinction. By the way, that's the same thing with the mother. The mother also makes no distinction, actually. And a lot of you may have mothers and fathers, or let's say your primary nurturer person, who still think that you are them, and therefore don't understand why you need to break away, and in fact get insulted, because you are them. Or if you're hurting but they're not hurting, they may not understand why are you hurting. I'm not hurting. This kind of thing. So it works both ways. So the very first thing is that the love object scenario that's established is seen as a unit, and the unit is the projection of the child, in this case, onto the mother or onto the love object, that it is good and all is well. Now, as the child grows and starts to get teeth and things like this, the feature of sucking on the breast, particularly for the mother, is less interesting. And the mother, or whoever it is that's with the bottle, takes the bottle away, eventually. But from the point of view of the child, the question is, why did you do that? I have done nothing wrong. I haven't insulted you. All I've done is grown a little bit of teeth and a little bit bigger. So why have you taken this nipple away? Why have you taken the breast away? And Freud calls this the oral phase. And he says that anyone who's still traumatized by that oral phase is still putting things in their mouth, like cigarettes, pens, or genitals, or something. It's the requirement to have, if you have not survived well your transition out of the oral phase, you will probably be very possibly into smoking into chewing your fingernails, doing something with your mouth. Yes, everyone look down the shoe. Okay. Now, the next thing, the next trauma that you have to, basically no one gets out of childhood unscathed, is Freud's argument. We make it out of childhood with scars and trauma and this kind of thing. So the next thing that happens, now this is attached, let me be very clear here, this is attached to the sexualness of something. So it's not like the child is really happy about having a bath or not having a bath. The child doesn't have the same reaction to not having, suddenly you say you're not having more baths. The child doesn't go, you bastards, all of you. No, because there's no relationship. It's not that kind of love object to the bathtub. I mean, if there is, it's a little interesting, but normally it's not. Usually it's not. Okay. The next thing is that the child, according to Freud, realizes something's gone horribly wrong and feels very compelled to give the parent or the guardian a present. Now, a gift. Now, the only gift the child can give to the parent is its shit, because it really is of the child. And anyway, the parents were very thrilled with the shit to start with. Can you imagine, I mean, for those of you that have had children, or for those of you that are still a child, okay, either one of them, or when a child first goes to the bathroom, you go, wow, it's doing everything. It has the 5 fingers, it's got the toes, it's got the shit, it's got the piss, fabulous. Okay, this can wear off very quickly. But eventually, at some point, that child needs to be toilet trained. Obviously, it'd be ridiculous if we were sitting in here and people here weren't toilet trained. Okay, that'd be an issue. You wouldn't be, quote, civilized at that point. You wouldn't be considered civilized. So the next phase is called the anal phase. Now, for anyone that's sitting with their legs crossed, I say this with love, I'm sitting with my legs crossed. Anyone that is very neat and has OCD issues had a difficult time with the oral phase, okay? Because your shit and your parents taking it on were not appreciated as much as you might have liked, so you repressed it. Whereas, for those of you that are real slobs and like everything is thrown everywhere, you basically said, well, I'm sorry if you don't like my shit, but I love my shit, so you just have to deal. Okay? Totally different ways of dealing with the anal phase. Both completely acceptable, but I realized that I had obviously anal phase issues because I was just saying earlier, I'm living now with a very lovely flatmate in Birmingham, not in London, I live with my partner, but this is a flatmate. And I found myself organizing all the spices alphabetically, because it just drove me insane. I don't cook, but it just annoyed me, that they weren't alphabetically organized. And she came and said, what have you done to the spices? And I was like, nothing. I also organized them by height and color within the thing. So, because they were, and the same thing with CDs and DVDs and that kind of thing. They're all organized. I have a very specific system. All right. Now,
if you don't do that, what happens to you? You get scratchy?
What?
If you don't do that,
it annoys me.
But no, but if you just don't do it, what does it make you feel like? Does it make you feel scratchy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scratchy, itchy.
Mm.
That's right. Yeah. No, unsettled.
So it has to be done and then we can settle down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, then I'm okay. And same thing about working on something. If I'm doing a big project, like I'm writing a book or I'm doing a big show or something like that, I have to clean the house. That's, we can talk method till the cows come home, but I can tell you my real method is cleaning. And I'm fantastic. If the house looks really clean, I've got a big project on. It helps me think. It helps me organize. It's not that I'm trying to, well, probably is that I'm also trying to get rid of and get out of doing it and not facing it. But actually, while I'm cleaning, doing my little thing, it helps me organize. I just think organizationally. Okay, now, this anal phase, for a lot of people who have maintained themselves as artists, they have not gotten out of the anal phase. They keep giving people their shit. Okay, and it's quite serious. And the question becomes, when is your shit better or worse than someone else's shit? How do you actually know if your shit is really shit, like good shit, or your shit is bad shit meaning really terrible shit, or your shit is really bad shit meaning very good shit. So when do you know on the shit scale where it fits? Now there's, Bataille, as I was saying last week, he was maybe I wasn't saying this last week. I meant to be saying this last week in case I wasn't saying this. He started a sort of philosophic trend of people called excremental philosophers. This is where this comes from. This idea that you have to get into your shit. And if you don't get into your shit, then you're not going to get very far in life. It's an interesting way of thinking. And it gets into the senses and the cesspool and the, this kind of stuff. So that's the third, and that happens around age 3, I guess, or 2 to 3. Okay, so by 2 or 3, you're already damaged. And the thing is that the next aspect of this is that, or I guess the argument, to put it slightly differently, is that in order to become civilized, you have to have a form of repression. That there needs to be some kind of repression that keeps you from becoming a complete lunatic and just saying, well, it's my shit. If you don't like it, you can just go fuck yourself. No. You have to learn how far to be repressed. And there's 2 types of repression. There's what's called basic repression, which creates civilization. And then there's surplus repression, which causes pain and anxiety and oppression and people freaking out and becoming,
Could you say those 2 again, please?
Yeah, basic
Yeah.
and surplus.
What was the basic one?
Basic one is required, it's how one becomes civilized, so that if I'm doing something and Natalie's doing something or Natalia's doing something, then when we're doing something, I say, well, I'm right, she says, well, she's right, who wins? It's kind of like one of those, did you ever study Socrates and No, not Prometheus. Thromithicus. Nobody knows. Anyway, this was a warrior. He was a soldier, and his argument against Socrates was might makes right. So how do you know if the real reason something isn't working is because you just are stronger? You just say, well, it's authority. My authority is better than your authority, so just forget it. Okay, so that obviously is an issue. Yeah? No? Yes? Hearing? Okay. So this basic and surplus repression is named such, not so much in Freud, but in one of the Frankfurt School people named Herbert Marcuse. Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse, who also worked at the State Department, actually. But anyway, he was one of the people of the Frankfurt School who, in the Frankfurt School environment, have you heard of the Frankfurt School before? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think it's called the Frankfurt School? Well done! It was based in Frankfurt.
And then they kind of spread around. Like the 20s they kind of started, didn't they? And then it kind of went on till...
It just went on
It just went on and on and on. I mean...
okay.
Yeah.
So the Frankfurt School is made up of Adorno, Theodore Adorno, who we'll get to in 2.5, 3 weeks, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, who I'm just speaking about now, Neumann, who you probably never heard of if you know anything about Frankfurt School. And what they argued basically was that they argued 2 main points. They took Freud's argument that I'm laying out here around this question of basic and surplus repression. And they said that the sexual life of a person is made to be completely repressed in order to fit into a capitalist environment. And in this repression, one becomes one-dimensional. And you must become one-dimensional, or you won't survive in the system. And the more one-dimensional you become, the more appropriate you are to work in the system. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle. So if you have children and you decide you want to be wild and free, it's going to be very difficult because the children need to go to school, and the schools need to be, you need to be in a certain area, or you need to get a house, and the house needs to have you need to pay for it, you need to get a mortgage, and and all I get, and suddenly it's like, wow, I'm everything I didn't want to be. I am in debt. I have children who are like little birds, need, and you can't be free, you can't be wild, because you have to go to their PTA meetings, or whatever they call them over here, parent moments. What are they called?
Yeah, they're not features.
Oh, they're called parent evenings. Wow. Anyway, you know the song Harper Valley PTA?
Yeah.
My mother was that woman. It was fantastic, except she didn't sleep around, much to her sadness, I think. But anyway, she wore the stiletto heels and the beehive hair, and she would go into these really bizarre military environments, because that's where we lived. My father was quite wonderful too, but anyway, she would walk in and they would just not know what to do with her. It was so every time I hear the song, I think, yes, hello, mother. And anyway, this type of thing where you are forced to fit into a thing, and if you don't succeed, it's your fault. Always. So on the one hand, you get this thing called, you are an individual, you must exit, you must learn how to exit, this whole Kantian enlightenment thing, we've been talking about, born to be free, you rush out, and this kind of thing, you figure out how to do it, and then, you're crushed. And if you get crushed, well, it's your own goddamn fault, goes the argument. And the Frankfurt School said, well, actually, that's so not the case. And let's figure out really what's going on here. What's really going on here is there's two aspects. One is the sexual repression that is required of every human being to fit into a capitalist environment, is what they're arguing. And the second thing is that there's a thing called the culture industry, which creates fashions and whatever that can mask the fact that this is happening, that can make it seem like something might be palatable when in fact it's not palatable. And that culture industry is a big business. And so they are based on this thing called false consciousness, where there's actually a true consciousness and then there's a false. Now, we're not going to get into the Frankfurt School more than that today. I think that there's a lot of things that are wrong with the argument, including the thing called false consciousness. But in any case, one thing that is very useful about it is this whole thing about how you are expected to behave sexually. It's interesting. You're not allowed to masturbate after the age of nothing. In the 1800s, for example, there's a very interesting study by this guy named Thomas Steele and I can't remember his buddy. They were two doctors. There was for some reason, there was a big craze of masturbation in young girls going on in England. Who knows what was happening with drinking water. And all these kids were being sent to these doctors to find out. It's called onanism. So just in case you come across those words, you'll know what it is. Onanism. Or tribadism. Tribadism is kind of like a form of masturbation. It was kind of early lesbianism or something, like before they had an actual word, where girls were helping each other masturbate somehow, So that's tribadism, tribadism, and then onanism. I'm not sure exactly the etymology of these words, but anyway, these were considered completely horrific. And the girls were mutilated, they were put in prison. A lot of times they were measuring clitorises to see what size they were, and if they were too big or too small, there was something wrong. Now, this was all part of a wider picture, argued Freud, that the society has a big secret that everyone knows about, and it's about the repression of sexuality, while at the same time peddling sexuality. So it's not just everyone's being repressed. At the same time, you're expected to have, skinny little bodies, or some sort of unattainable sexual something, whatever it is. So let's just backtrack so you know where we're going with this. So what Freud was the first to say, and he got hammered for it. People really had issues with his thing. First of all, it didn't sound like science, and in fact, it really wasn't on some level. And it gets disputed today, you know. And also, a lot of things, a lot of the ways he wrote it did sound a little bit, you know, either sexist or misogynist or whatever. I mean, we're going to look at hysteria today in a minute. So, but what he basically makes the argument is that you have these three, you have more than the two phases I just talked about. You have several phases that keep scarring you. At the same time, each culture has an imprint. Because what you need to do is figure out, consciously or unconsciously, usually, it's not like you're rationally figuring out how can I get ahead, but you have to figure out how to survive in the society. So the society has a horizon. That horizon, we're going to call that horizon the superego. The superego, super, S-U-P-E-R, ego, E-G-O, superego. The superego is kind of like the big law. So now, when you're a child, you have to follow your parents. I mean, first of all, you love them, and you haven't really made this division yet between yourself and your parents. Then you find out that things keep getting taken away from you that you thought were yours. And there's a lot of separation things that have to go on that you have to deal with. You know, there's a whole thing called Fort Da. This big game you can play with your children, or that you play, you know, where you go peekaboo. This whole peekaboo thing. Here, gone, here, gone. This whole thing, and the child is always laughing. Freud says, well, the reason this is going on is because the child is learning about the separation. They think they're the same person. So when you're doing this separation business, they think it's hilarious. Okay? Well, every child loves, I mean, so Freud is making this argument that this is universal. This is a universal position. The universal, we're together and now we're separate. Together, separate. Together, Fort, da. No, it's, sorry, da is here. Fort. Here, gone. Here, gone. Here, gone. So, in this here, gone relationship, this Fort, da, F-O-R-T, E, stroke, da, D-A, you look it up, you'll see it. This is where the child creates, learns to create this begins to realize, wow, what's at the end of my hand is kind of the end of me. And what's over there is not me. That's a very profound moment when the child learns this. And they learn it often by looking in the mirror, and they start seeing that there's this thing that's them but not them, this kind of thing. Okay. Now Freud says, in your family, the very first person who sets up the law as law is daddy, is your father. Now, nowadays, it's whoever takes on that role. That can be mother, father, transgendered person, intersex person. You know, it could be someone who's butch, someone who's femme, you know, whoever takes on the father role. That the father role is the person who goes out of the house and comes back in, supposedly bringing money. Okay, that's the father role on some level. And the mother role is the one that doesn't go out of the house and nurtures and feeds people. So, of course, one of the feminist things was, you know, don't learn how to cook. You know, don't learn how to sew. I mean, don't do any of this stuff, okay? You know, parenthesis. Anyway, so the father's rule is what sets up this thing called the superego, this horizon. As a child, you're in relationship to the superego. Now you, little ego, you have a little P in your head, let's say, that's called the ego. And it needs to grow. It needs to grow in order for you to have a personality. Otherwise, you'll be without personality. So, Freud makes the argument. There's two things that are going on here. First of all, if you can't manage to save your ego in relation to the superego, if one of them flattens out, so you either become completely ego, or complete, which is basically sociopath, or completely superego, which is psychopath. Maybe it's the other way around. Yeah, sorry, superego. If you become totally, so you're nobody but this superego, or you're nobody but this ego. These are the traumas. You're fully closed, then you are not fully human. He makes this very profound thing. So he basically makes the argument that to be human is to be neurotic, which is very important. Neurosis is the font, is the basis of being human. It's the thing that keeps you greased open. So your little freakouts and your little weepings and falling down and freaking out, very important to humanity. It puts together empathy, it has to do with generosity. All of those things are very important. And if you don't show that, if this thing is repressed, which happens on a variety of different levels and for a variety of different reasons, this basic repression, you know, you have to have basic repression in order to be inhuman, I mean in the society, but too much repression can get you to become either a sociopath or a psychopath. So the trick is to balance the relationship between the ego and the superego. Now, are you following this? You need a break. Are you okay? You're okay. We can continue. Okay. So that the superego, daddy, we'll just call it daddy for the shorthand, although don't put that in your papers. Okay, just say superego, right? The superego is the law. You must negotiate that law as a child. So you're always sort of having to box with the law. And at the same time, you have your ego that's growing. Now, you know, like I said before, your parents are dealing with the issue of the fact that they also are having separation anxiety. They don't necessarily want to see you as your own being. So on some level, also they have gone through childhood before you and therefore have already carried all the scars, which they are now imparting to you by accident or on purpose. So that doesn't help. So you're in the situation where you're trying to get your ego to, you know, have a presence, to become present. And at the same time, you've got the superego telling you what to do. And you must do this, and you must do that, and you must do it this way, and you can't do it that way, and if you do, I'm going to, you know, slap you or something. Okay, now, this relationship, the child, according to Freud, begins to notice that if the child argues one way with the nurturing person, the one that tends to be the more nurturing one, which tends to be this female person called the mother, when that happens, they notice that the superego person, that is to say daddy, has a little bit more power. So the child begins to realize that they can play one off the other, which is the big game. And according to Freud, the child realizes that the real task here is to get rid of the father and sleep with the mother. And that's called the Oedipal complex. The Oedipal complex is the child is sitting there and looking at what's going on, going, okay, the female of the species seems to be the cool person, but she doesn't have a lot of power. So I like her, in fact I love her. In fact, she was the one that started it all off, I mean in terms of the breast and everything. Then she took it away, that was a bit of a problem. But then you had this, you know, there's all these little things, negotiations. So, if I can get rid of the father, and I can sleep with the mother, it would be perfect. Okay, so, normally in a heterosexual male scenario, what actually happens is that the men that are heterosexual men, according to Freud, end up marrying their mothers, basically. So the girl they bring home to meet mommy and daddy is in fact a young version, or an older version anyway, some version of mother. Okay, that's the first step. Clearly, the girl does the same thing. She thinks, must kill the father, sleep with the mother. Okay, now Freud recognizes that if that happens, that's a bit of a problem, because then you have lesbians. Because obviously if you kill off the father and take the father's position and end up wanting to sleep with the mother, okay, issue, you know, red bells, you know, this kind of thing. So the girl has to go through yet another stage, which is called the Electra complex. The Electra complex, E-L-E-C-T-R-A, the Electra complex is that the girl realizes, I must kill the father and sleep with the mother. But then she realizes, fuck, I don't have a penis. So probably I can't really kill the father because I need the penis in order to be fully functioning in the society. but I can't fully function in this society because I don't have this penis. So what I will do instead is I will want to kill the father, but in fact not kill the father. Instead I'll kill the mother, because she's kind of in the way, and there'll be this hatred scenario that grows up between mother and daughter, and I will then eventually sleep with the father, who I actually can't stand, because originally he was the one that caused all the problems to start with, and I originally want to sleep with the mother. So the hysteria that a woman has, apparently, is because of this double issue. This issue of, just like the little boy, want to sleep with, mother, must kill father, this kind of thing. For the girl, it's got this next little role going on, because at some point, also in this mythical story I'm telling you, the girl and the boy realize that the girl does not have a penis. And so the girl is considered castrated. Of course, it's all different types of castration, and if you really push the argument, castration usually means no testicles, but anyway, let's not get totally technical. Okay, so the castration complex is that the boy thinks, wow, maybe the girl did something wrong, and if I don't do something male, masculine, I'm going to be castrated, just like the girl. So the boy has a thing called the castration complex, and therefore has to become really macho. And the girl sees that whoever is allowed to go out in the world and be playing in rock bands and rolling around in the mud has a penis. And therefore she has what they call penis envy. So the boy gets, are you following this? The boy gets castration complex and secretly thinks that all girls are going to cut off his cock and balls. And the girl thinks, you bastard men, you have cocks, we don't have cocks, I hate you. Okay, charming. What?
Just about something else.
Yeah, just about something. You see? Yeah, no. Now, for any boy that then becomes gay, so here's the newest problem, they see this as a problem and don't want to kill the father. Okay? Or let's say if they're closeted or they have repressed homosexual tendencies or whatever the story is, however you want to put it on it. So they don't want to kill the father, they don't want to sleep with the mother, they're in a bind. So some of these boys become effeminate, so they can kind of be the mother without having to sleep with the mother. And so on it goes. And same with the girl, becomes much more butch, becomes daddy, all these little machinations that go on. Now, that's just the surface. That's just the surface. Because what Freud is saying is that in order for civilization to actually get started, you have to kill the father. You just have to. You have to kill the law. In order for you to take over, you have to get rid of the father. It's sad but true. So you have to make the father, if you're not going to actually kill the father, which is Totem and Taboo, that's that book that he wrote called Totem and Taboo. Totem, T-O-T-E-M, and Taboo. The totem is the father, and the taboo is the killing of the father, the fratricide, the killing of the king. In order for you to have real civilization, you got to get rid of the daddy, you got to get rid of God, you got to get rid of that main thing that's creating this law. It's also the position of the Enlightenment. You got to get rid of this overarching superego or overarching law so that you can break through. And the thing is that the daddy is not going to say, oh, that's a great idea, here, let me help you. The daddy is going to fight you. And as they always say, there's no fool like an old fool. Okay, so the daddy at some point begins to realize, wow, I've been taken. I don't have the kind of power I used to have. And either the daddy becomes psychologically castrated, or gets depressed, or somehow makes friends with his son. Now, if the daughter tries to do this, there's this extra level that has to happen. The daughter has to flirt with the father in order to kill the father. So there's a whole nother level that goes on. You see, so a lot of this sounds vaguely familiar, I would think, because there's some truth in what I'm saying here. There's a grain of truth. The question is, what's the grain? So now, so you've got the bare bones of this. Now let's just backtrack again. We're talking about the conscious and the unconscious. Freud says that this whole ego thing, this whole question of the oral starts there. I know that you have a pen in your mouth. Yes, lunch. Sorry. Yeah, careful. You know, so the whole thing is sexual. You need to understand where the sexual thing is happening. The building, when you go off and you see someone who's always presenting themselves and, you know, I'm so cool, I'm so fabulous, I'm so wonderful, that's somebody who doesn't have a strong ego. So don't be fooled. Usually people who are presenting themselves as the greatest thing since sliced bread, do you have the expression over here? Yeah. Once they present, usually means that they haven't had a minute to actually build their ego. They keep getting it hit down, hit down, hit down. So they have to present this hologram of themselves. So this is what Freud calls wounded narcissism. This is a great terms. Has to always be looking in the mirror to remember who they are. Has to always be getting complimented, because the compliment goes in and just goes out, goes in and goes out, because they don't have an ego to hold it. They haven't learned how to make their ego grow. They haven't learned that first step, because they haven't been able to kill the father. Is his basic position. Which doesn't mean now go out and kill your dads. It's basically saying that there has to be a way in which you learn how to break the law, basically. And the question is, how do you really break a law without creating complete and utter chaos, or, you know, being this completely uncivilized person? See, there's all these traps, and Freud is trying to show you where they're all lying. So he's got another thing I wanted you guys to read at one point called "The Child is Being Beaten." Did anybody read that one? I mean, there's three of them that are very big, or four actually. There's "A Child is Being Beaten." This is on masturbation and also being beat up as a child. For anybody, and I'm very sorry if anybody has experiences themselves, or you know people that have, because this is very hard kind of stuff to talk about. But in a child that's being beaten, what Freud argues is this whole story I'm outlining, you know, this whole thing with the Electra, the Oedipus, the superego, the anal thing, all these different traumas that you have. If you survive and you now have kids yourself, so the cycle begins to repeat itself, it's so exhausting that you can become just like your father, or just like your mother, in not the good ways. You can take on all the bad ways, and you can look at yourself in the mirror and go, wow, I look just like my fill in the blank. That's freaky. Okay, so, and what happens there is when that happens, the whole process begins again. And it's very hard to break that. And if you've been brought up in a family environment, in a nuclear family environment, where you literally are being beaten, there's every possibility you will do that to your child. Not because you hate them, not because you don't know any better, but because the way in which the psychology operates, it's the sexual link to this relation between masturbation and the inability to be sexual, to be fully formed yourself, that keeps getting knocked away. So a lot of women, for example, men too, obviously, well, men are often, whatever, both parties are problematic for similar and sometimes similar and sometimes different reasons. A lot of times women can be very brutal because they are meant to be sexual, but they're not allowed to be sexual. So there's this weird thing that goes on, and one becomes explosive. Or hysterical, that's the other version. And he has a whole thing on hysteria in women. The men, same thing. There's the thing, you must sow your seeds, you must, be sexual all the time, every 5 minutes. And let's say you don't want to be. Let's say, I don't know, it's not totally what you're into. Are you then not a man? If you cry, are you then not a man? All these kind of, this poking. And this kind of thing usually results in someone blowing up. And you can turn that on to your child. So he gets into this whole relationship to this analysis called "The Child is Being Beaten," and it's really worth reading, particularly if you have gone through that kind of thing yourself. The other thing that's interesting, the other case study that I often ask students to read is Wolfman and Ratman. Actually, Ratman's more interesting than well, they're both interesting. So Ratman is about this client that came to Freud who had dreams of rats always coming out of his anus or going into his anus, eating him. And he was completely, he couldn't get rid of this dream. He couldn't get rid of this thing that the rats kept eating him through his anus. And there's a whole study about when you have these dreams of vermin, like rats are in your house, or mice, or fleas, or some kind of pest or vermin type thing. Freud makes a very long and extensive analysis of how this is a very specific kind of repressed homosexuality or lesbian repression, and that you think you're going to be exposed, and at the same time you want to be exposed, you want to be eaten. So it's this whole horrible war that you're having with yourself. Okay, now for the next fun thing to tell you about is what's his name? Schreiber. Schreiber, Schreber, was a judge. Schreiber believed that God spoke out of his ass, and he was, and he really believed this. So he came to Freud to have a discussion, and it's an amazingly interesting study. The study that Freud makes of Schreiber, and what does this mean to think that God is speaking out of your asshole, and what that's about. And Bataille gets into this. In fact, whoever's doing Bataille, it's picking on you again. The solar anus in Visions of Excess is his comment on Schreiber. The solar anus saying that actually God does speak out of your ass. And it's about time people realized it. Is he meaning it metaphorically? Is he meaning it actually? I mean, the same question with Abraham. Is he actually hearing God? If he is hearing God, is he actually hearing voices? Is he schizophrenic? I mean, these are various things. So here, these are the different levels that are going on here. Okay, one more piece of the puzzle, and then I think we should take like a 5-minute break. Here's the next piece of the puzzle. The next piece of the puzzle is that you have a superego, which I've explained, which obviously exists in the world, but is basically the way he's understanding how the mind is established. You have an ego, which is always in a bit of a boxing match with the superego. And if the superego has its way, it'll smash the ego. So the only way Freud says the egos can survive is through a very specific kind of violence, which is getting rid of the father, or getting rid of the law, in that sense. Okay, and then the ego can begin to grow. The next thing, though, is this thing called the libido. L-I-B-I-D-O, libido. The libido is the sexual impulses, the hunger you feel, also called being horny. Okay, this libido is on, and the more hormones you have, or the more something you have, can really be on. You could say, I've lost my libido, or I have a very strong libido. That doesn't mean you have a strong ego, but having a strong ego helps you have a strong libido. So that's all connected. And the last one is called the id, I-D, id. The id is the kind of the gateway to the unconscious. You could almost say that these other things also act as a gateway to this thing going back and forth. The unconscious is just these volcanic impulses of death drive and you know, wanting to kill yourself, wanting to kill anybody else, death, destruction, pleasure, laughter, all of it. It's all bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. It's all in your unconscious. And when you dream, this is what begins to filter out, which we'll get back to after, let's say, shall we come back after 7 minutes? Can you have a cigarette for that long? Okay.
Thank you so much.
That's right, exactly. Good. Okay, we'll just take a little break.
I'll do it. Feeling a bit lethargic.
What's that?
I had 2 pints of lunch and then now I'm feeling a little.
Diet Coke.
Yeah.
There is.
Sorry, you say,
I've just realised I just have to know
I can do it with Diet Coke. Do you want to change?
Yeah.
How are you doing? That, you know, take that with a grain of salt on that level.
Don't we find it interesting that he always has that big one cigar?
I know. Which is how I'm going to begin this part of the seminar. Freud also says very famously, sometimes a cigar is just a good smoke. Not everything is always standing in for something else. Okay, so if you see a tall, thin building, it's not always that there is an obsession with a thin cock or something like that, or that, like, you know, if you find, you know, slits here and there, that people are not worrying about vaginas every 5 minutes. So not always is this thing symbolizing. So you have to figure out when is something symbolizing, when is it not symbolizing, and so on and so forth. Now, what I want to do is give you a certain handle now on how to think about dreams and the unconscious. Now we're going to do a kind of weird dream analysis. And I meant to ask you last week, but I was too psychotic myself to actually remember to ask you to remember about your dreams. Okay, so while I'm doing this, think about your dreams. So, because yes, Anita, you will probably be called on first.
Right.
Since you rose like... Okay, there's basically 2 things you need to think about here. One is a thing called condensation, like you see on the windowsill. Condensation, C-O-N-D-E-N, sation. Okay, the other is displacement. So these are the 2 things, and these are very much part of the dream work. Now, when I use the term, Sigmund, use the term dream work, it means to say that while you're sleeping, you're working, your brain is working. And your brain is doing something in the dream, and it's called the dream work. And if your brain isn't doing this, you don't necessarily have to remember your dreams, but if you really don't have any dreams, then you're not actually having a good sleep. That these days, they that do these things have made an argument that dreaming actually allows for your body to detox a very specific way. So, So, now, displacement is when, an example of displacement is when you're walking down, you've had a terrible day at work. You cannot believe that no one understood anything you were saying, and you're totally frustrated, and you go home and you kick the dog. Okay, that's displacement. So rather than getting mad at your boss or whomever it is that's the actual cause of the problem. You kick this thing that's sitting there going, what, what did I do? Okay, that's called displacement. In the dream work, the dream is often doing this thing called displacement. And we'll get into that a little bit more seriously in a minute. The second thing is the condensation. So, I don't know if anybody's ever boiled something all the way down so that the water's no longer there and you just have precipitate, or you just have like something left over. And then, like, let's say, pretend you can pour water back in and it comes back to life. So it's condensed, so it's at a very tiny, 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 tiny bit of it. The dream work also condenses. So it both displaces and it condenses. So sometimes the thing that you're dealing with is dealing with a displacement, sometimes it's dealing with a condensation, and sometimes it's doing both. But in all times, it's wish fulfillment. And the wish that's being fulfilled is always about yourself, it doesn't matter who you're dreaming about, it's you. It's you as your cousin, it's you as your father, it's you as, whomever it is. So if you dream that, you killed your father, if you dream that your father has died, it's because you wanted to kill him. Okay, so we're going to get into this kind of thing. Because the dream is very helpful, so that you don't actually become a mass murderer, that you have these things. Freud is very specific about these. And he has different positions around what becomes part of this condensation. So, for example, condensation isn't necessarily a symbol. It can be a symbol, but it's not necessarily a symbol. So one of the typical versions of something that is a condensed scenario is if you dream of teeth falling out, particularly your teeth falling out. If anybody's had this, there are issues around sexuality. Okay, around one's own sexual being, one's own sexual health. It's the fear of sex, usually, when your teeth fall out. So you smile and they're all gone. And that's a very common dream manifestation. It's a condensed fear, it's a condensation of fear. Because you're obviously not displacing your fear onto your teeth falling out. It's taking a whole bunch of things and condensing it into that one image where the teeth fall out. If you dream of, did anybody read dreams in the unconscious? Did anybody read what you read? Some of you read it. So he gets into this whole question of what is the unconscious. So if you're dreaming often about water is always sexual. Again, pretty much everything is always sexual. So you can pretty much count on that. But the water part of it is not the fear of it, unless you're drowning in it, obviously. Maybe that's obvious. But if the water is dark and creeping up and so on, it's the way in which you're trying to negotiate your unconscious. And there's a whole thing he deals with houses. So if you go into the basement of the house, you're dealing with your unconscious, and again, this is all sexual, okay? So you're dealing with these very hidden concerns, these concerns that you want to keep something secret. It's in your unconscious. You are afraid to negotiate it. If you start going up the stairs into the top of the house, it's that you're fighting with the superego. It's pretty corny on some level. The whole thing about ovens, a bun in the oven, it's a baby in the oven, the uterus, that's an oven, in case you didn't catch that. If you dream of, let's say, placemats. Now, of course, people don't really dream of placemats too often these days because, they don't have doilies. What do they call them here? They look like these little lace things that you put on. Doilies. Okay, you put them on the ends of chairs. Does anybody have that in their house now? Nobody will admit to it. Yeah. Okay, one person admits to it.
But they're really nice knitted Mexican ones, so they don't look like doilies.
Okay, so they're not really doilies. They're like the Mexican version, the upgraded version of a doily. Okay, well, this also is about, if you start dreaming of, now watch everybody start dreaming of these doilies. The doilies are like the trippets, it is, you're dreaming of the fear of the skirt. The fear of the skirt is the fear of the female and so on and so forth, okay? If you dream of snakes, it's again a fear of the feminine, interestingly, by the way. A lot of people might have, a very common dream is particularly for young girls to be throwing up a snake. They're afraid to become the mother. They're afraid to deal with their femininity. He has this whole thing. So now, you might be interested in how he comes up with these, you know. And it's not just Freud coming up with, sitting in a room. I'm on cocaine now, so I'm going to come up with something interesting. There he is. There's Freud. Hello. He did have a lot of cocaine. He did. He wrote most of his work on cocaine. And in fact, the cocaine papers are quite interesting to read because they're kind of unedited. But on the other hand, you might not want to read it because it's kind of awful. I mean, if you read your work on cocaine, wouldn't you be a little bit embarrassed? You know what I mean? Like, so take pity if you do this. Okay. The other thing you should know about Freud, which is kind of interesting, is that he had a writer's block. So a lot of the things that he was writing, he wrote to fake audiences. Like you'll see, he says, "Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to do that," because he could not write. It's fantastic. So do what you need to do to get yourself writing. Freud had to pretend he was giving lectures. For some reason that got him into the right headspace. Okay. Any questions so far about this displacement condensation thing? Who wants to go first with the dreams? Anita? Did you have a dream recently?
No.
Okay. Anybody want to talk about it? Thank you.
I have two that have reoccurred throughout like my entire life.
Okay, great. Reoccurring dreams is great.
Yeah, I know, right? One, which I just think is hilarious because you said water is always sexual. I've always had dreams that I could breathe underwater, and then I'm just like swimming through like great, wonderful bodies of water, and I'm just like, oh, this is how people breathe. Why didn't I just breathe underwater all the time? This is great.
And when you're underwater, is it beautiful water? Can you see?
I'm very happy in the water, yeah.
But is the water, can you see through it?
Yeah.
Are there fish running around, or is there anything, plants, or?
No, it's usually
like
just
pool?
sort of, sort of clear, nice blue water.
Sun coming in?
Yeah, I think I have sleep apnea or something. I'm just going to, one of them. I think it's because I can't actually breathe in real life.
That's right. No, so you're in this thing, and it just goes on.
Yeah.
And you're just swimming around.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the second one? And you've had that since you were a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, my whole life.
And wait, sorry. Is there any pattern to you having it? Have you noticed that you have it more or less?
No.
Okay. From now on, try and write it down when you get them.
I will.
You'll see a pattern. You'll see anyway. What's the second one?
The other one, definitely anxiety based, and I think it's when my arms are falling asleep, if I'm like sleeping on my side or something. I've always had dreams since I was little that there'll be like pock marks or something, and I'll go to like pop one, and I'll pull vines out of my body, and just like keep going and going and going. These like awful vines that I can feel like coming out of the sinews of my body.
And the vines are like veins, vein.
Yeah, sort of like root systems of plants and things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's always like, oh God, why is that there? Like, yeah.
Okay. Anybody want to take a go at thinking this through? Those of you that read. Millie, you want to give it a go?
Absolutely no idea.
George, you want to give it a go?
I think the vines is.
Oh, there you are.
Well, from what I read with Freud, I've got it right at all. I think that's your sort of repressed sexuality, almost like we're pulling it out of you. It's really painful. It's sort of.
You're not going to offend me. I'm a cognitive person, so.
I know.
Freud,
I'm just saying that. I think you might say that. I don't know about the water ones probably. Again, it's just sexual, isn't it? All sexual.
Means you had an issue with your parents and your repression of sexuality.
Why do you say that?
Because that's all that everything comes out of.
No. So that's it. That's our only go.
Or is it maybe like a fear of nature or fear of because if the vines are sort of running wild?
I think Freud would probably say it's looking down and discovering something that you've repressed so much that you've never noticed before, and then pulling that. I do agree with like sort of the idea of like pulling something out that's like uncomfortable to pull out, And like, you know, it's been actually quite a while since I've had that one, but I used to get them a lot when I was younger. And I think that Freud probably would have said it had something to do with like discovery of sexuality, and also I think that nature, the word nature, is a very interesting, you know, because there's these root systems, and roots are what, underground, and it's under your subconscious because it's Freud, and everything's just that easy for Freud.
Anybody else want to give it a go? Dane, you want to? Sarah?
No, just that. Yeah. And what's just under the surface pulling out? It's actually very clear, and it's growing and
But there'd also be that because of the word vein and vine are very close, there'd be this whole question of the relationship between a vein, your blood system, you know, being pulled out, but also being nervous about pulling something out is usually an expression of pulling out one's cock, right? And the fear or the anxiety, performance anxiety of that is how he would actually deal with that question. Not that, you know, so it's this worry, which obviously you're not having very much anymore, so good. And, but it's a worry about how you negotiate the ways in which one is playing around with, I mean, this is like, you know, who knows, I mean, on one level, this is just very shorthanded, very, you know, problematic ways of doing, like, sort of, what's the best way of putting this, charlatan Freudianism. But, having said that, why should that stop us? The vein, vine, pulling out, think about that when you have your own dreams, when you start really thinking, because there's, like, the vein and the vine, that's going to be a condensation. You know, the whole, this is why I'm try and learn to recognize what is being condensed and what is being displaced. The anxiety may be getting displaced onto this pulling out, not pulling out, being interested, being mesmerized by it, you know, but at the same time continuing to pull it out, this kind of thing, and having this anxiety. And then you also have the swimming dreams. I'm wondering, do they happen at the same time?
No.
No.
I've never had a dream where I'm like swimming and pulling.
No, I mean, like you had the dream of the swimming and then you fell asleep and you had the dream of the pulling out. Yeah, that makes sense.
So you're feeling really different.
No, not really. I've always associated it with like my arm falling asleep, because I'll like wake up and my arm will be like dead. You know, pins and needles.
Because I have dreams very specifically about anxieties that I really feel. I have a recurrent dream that I find a room in a house, and I never knew it was there. I'll have that dream over and over, and then I'm going to miss a train or a plane or something like that. It's always the same dream, like just in different forms.
So you find a room that never existed before, you never knew about it, and that causes you to do what you need to do.
No, I'm always late then. I'm going to miss a flight or a train, and everyone else is on it. That's the other thing.
And when you say everyone else, you mean your whole family, all your friends?
No, my family.
Your family?
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to be left behind because you're curious about going to this.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah.
So the way, I mean, without trying to, you know, because I'm not a trained, well, I have actually some training, but I'm not a certifiably trained analyst on this level. However, the way you do this kind of thing, the way you really start to think it through, is to ask yourself these questions. Well, what could this possibly mean? So you have the dream. It's very important to have a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen or your laptop or something next to you when you wake up, because you often can't remember the whole dream unless you have it like a continual basis. Okay, so then you have this dream and you go and you keep thinking it through, and you then write down what it is, and you start trying to think what's being positioned here. Why is it? What is it that happened in the day that might have kicked it off, or the night, or the week, on the one hand. But on the other hand, you just start thinking, well, how do I pull it in? Now, why do you think this is important to like discuss this? What, you know, is this just crap? Is this just bullshit? Is this like, you know, is there any usefulness in this?
We're just giving a lot of credence to what he's saying, if actually we can directly relate our experiences to what he's bringing out.
Yeah.
But it's important to dream, otherwise if you don't act out the wish fulfillment in your dream, then you're doing worse than yourself.
That's right.
Is there a suggestion of some mental housekeeping going on that you kind of sorting stuff out subconsciously, and then, as you say, you're sort of allowed to put it behind you then and move on.
No, it's really saying. Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
Does it like just give us the insight into what's happening under all the like ID and into the unconscious?
Well, it may give you an insight, but I guess the question I'm really trying to ask you to think about is this true? Is this accurate, what I'm saying to you?
I think that there's, and it's the problem that I've always had with Freud, where I feel like he sort of is wishy-washy about whether he's like a social constructionist or an essentialist, because he really picks and chooses with both.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, well, this is always true. This is only true in these cases. And so I feel like it's useful in the sense that it gets us as societies to investigate some of those things in a stronger way.
Mm-hmm.
Do I feel like it's true? I feel
Mhm.
like no. I feel like there are truths within it at points.
Okay, so what I'm asking you is that he claims, or people that are Freudian claim, that this is an analytic system. It's called psychoanalysis, not psychology. Okay, it's an analytic he's putting forward, which is to say that there is something about it that can go from moment 1 to moment 2 in a predictive way. So, is it that, as Arch is saying, that he is basically, depending on the hour of the day, or who he's dealing with, he says it one way and then he takes a set of drugs and he says it another way or whatever. I mean, so it's kind of like, very uneven, which is definitely going on in some respects. Or is he, or is he giving a set of metrics that enable one to think outside of a mathematical model and still have a predictive scenario? Because that's what he's claiming.
Would this scenario only work for the so-called Western society? Because I assume that it's all based on symbolism, on certain symbols that most of the Western society will respond to. If you were to analyze a dream of a tribal Indian from Paraguay,
The famous tribal Indian person from Paraguay.
Yeah.
Who's not in the West. Anyway.
Would the same principles apply to them? Because maths is a science, because within Earth bounds we can measure it. 1 + 1 will be the same in Siberia as it is in Australia. Whether, I don't know.
Yes, he is saying that this is true. It's a universal, it's a science. He's saying it fits for the, the tribal person in, wherever they are, as long as they have an environment that sets up a male and a female household, this is what will happen.
But what the symbolism is.
It's a nuclear family. And if, for example, you're living in an environment with one parent, but you're living in a society that claims that it should be 2 parents, one of them being male and the other one being female, then there'll be an extra layer of all this other stuff that goes on, guilt, horror, I'm not as good, I'm better, whatever the stories are, that weave in. He's saying this is a scientific position. And the first time I read Freud was a million years ago when I was a child, and I thought I was going to have to kill him. Or, I was so angry. I have some of the books, and they all say, like, pig, asshole, unbelievable, Dora, you should have, stood up for yourself, this kind of stuff. Maybe I'm getting older or something and stupider, but I think that it's worth at least raising the question, is it a science? In what way, why does it not go away? Why does he keep, it's like a bad penny, does he keep coming back,
But, I mean, Oedipus and Electra, they're not his ideas anyway.
No.
He's just working
of course.
myths. So
Yeah.
What he does is tap into, I think, cultural ideas that are very prevalent anyway. So
Right.
people keep coming back to him because he did masses of studies and back them all up. But loads of his studies, I did the same. I read him when I was a teenager and I hated him. It made me really, really angry. I thought he was just a sexist pig. And I just think, I mean, so many of his writings about women are so dubious because they're so based in that time as well, I think, very much.
Okay, so let's put that on the table. There's another person who you need to hear the name of, who I usually ban from my courses, but I feel compelled now to mention, Lacan, Jacques Lacan, and Jacques, L-A-C-A-N, Lacan, and Jacques Lacan, who I do think is problematic, in a way that I don't think Freud is, but anyway. He had a very famous sentence that people who basically don't read Lacan but want to sound like they have always say, which is that the unconscious is structured like a language. I heard that once, I heard it like 50 million times, so you might as well hear it now too, so you can, at dinner parties, you could like say, trot up a sentence. And what he's saying there is that there's certain things about Freud that were correct. One is this notion of the unconscious. One is the way in which the unconscious filters things and has this kind of weird synaptic move that's going on, which you're now proving with morphogenesis and whatever. And in this scenario, Lacan makes the argument that there is this whole question of relation between the phallus and the lac, and the whole castration conflict, which he raises to a much bigger environment. Now, then there are people like Irigaray, Lucy Irigaray, L-U-C-E, not L-U-C-Y, L-U-C-E, Irigaray, I-R-I-G-A-R-A-Y, Irigaray, and she was studying with Lacan in Paris, and she thought he was such a sexist pig that she wrote pretty much the same thing he was writing, except she called it the speculum of the other woman, of the other, woman. And she was thrown out of the Lacanian Institute for being essentialist, which was fantastic. Anyway, now she's also gone on to write stuff on Heidegger and so on and so forth. I'm telling you this because I asked you the question, why don't they go away? Why don't you stop it? Like, why are we still finding this somewhat interesting? And it's not just about, a mental health act or, or these are not psychologists. They're not all that interested in your mental health in that sense. I mean, and psychology, dubious anyway, sorry, maybe it's psychologists. They're saying the psychoanalytic group, Melanie Klein, very interesting writer, Juliet Mitchell, a feminist Freudian, who else? Jacqueline Rose, feminine sexuality, Lacanian. Gillian Rose, her sister who died, who wrote The Melancholy Science. These all very serious feminists, very serious gay and lesbian crowd are like hooked, as it were, on this. So, on some level, the question is, well, what is it that works, and what is it that, is it just this cultural thing?
Well, I would think you sort of touched on it earlier, which is the idea of meaning making.
Okay.
And I think that meaning making is very, very valuable in sort of societal creation, because you think about like gay and lesbian movements didn't have a movement before there was the name of the identity.
Yeah.
And so in the same way of meaning making, psychoanalytically, people are looking for explanations to the how and why we do things in the ways that we do, or experience things in the ways that we experience. And so something that seems to be universalizable within your own cultural construct then becomes truth within your own social constructs, until you maybe have to meaning make with something outside of that.
Right. Okay, so now here's the next question then. We're going to move on to Hegel. Hegel even goes away less than Freud. Okay, so believe it or not, Hegel has much more of a, he's able to hang out more than the other ones. He never talks about sex, ever. So, is there something about the fear of sex that people have, or the fact that sex seems to be subjective or somehow is not analytic, that it cannot be brought in analytically, or did Freud just get it wrong, basically? You know, in other words, when we start dealing with Hegel, and when you may also hate Hegel, I don't know, but probably because he's very logical, he makes a lot of sense after a while, after like the first several hours of being bashed. Come back to the question, what is it about these people who were running away from the Nazis, the Frankfurt School, they went to New York, and felt compelled to bring Freud with them? What was this, a Freudian analysis? What is it that gives it its levity, its gravitas? So, in other words, one of the things you'll find, if you read anything by Erich Fromm, which is called, I can't think of the name of the book now, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Very famous book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. He argues that the whole German culture and the whole Western European culture, so this gets back to what Natalia was saying, is based on the fear of the father and the secret wish to kill him, and the secret, even bigger secret wish to be treated like a child. Therefore, when Hitler came on the stage, there was a complete blindness, and that people just threw themselves into support of Hitler. Because the thing about fascism that's both compellingly interesting and totally scary is that it's supported by a mass movement always. It's not a dictatorship, or it's not a dictatorship to start with. It always has a mass movement. So the Tea Party in the States, I mean, it's very much in the, why are you laughing? No, it's very much in the same scenario where here you have a party in the States which has tried to take down the government, which is, I mean, they're willing to take down the government. Now, why these people aren't, I don't know, arrested for treason or something is surprising to me. I'm very surprised. But part of it is because there is a very strong mass movement that says, has the right to speak, really, okay, you know, it's like, okay. It's not dissimilar, and I don't mean that they're now thinking of gassing people, because I'm not talking about this level, but it's very important that you understand what is the psychology that takes completely relatively intelligent people, let's not go overboard, but basically relatively intelligent, and blinds them. And there's a whole study with Jungian, Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, who was another, he went off in a different direction. He has whole arguments about archetypes and how there are societal archetypes. How is it that fascism works? Why does it work? What is so compelling about it? And the argument is that it's sexually compelling. It allows for the father to dominate, and it makes things fit. And the things that don't fit have to go. These are very important components of fascism, so that the sexual moment, as long as it's to do something like create the society and create a, you know, keep the society ticking over, is part of the way in which one is trying to develop this relationship of the sexual. Otherwise, if you're doing anything else with the sexual, like sleeping around, like whatever it is, bad, 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 try it. See what I'm suggesting. If you end up having, let's say, I mean, not that I'm suggesting this, but let's say there was a big party and everyone just decided to have sex with each other. It'd be interesting, but it wouldn't go over very well in this time period. In the 60s, it was not unusual, you know, to sleep with, you know, a lot of people. In the 70s also. The 80s, it began to wane, but there's still, you know, little pop-up moments of orgies happening here and there. 90s. By about mid-90s, 2000 kind of died. That's right. Well, that was HIV crisis. However, every social movement that has ever tried to change the system is always sexual. Why? What is it about sex that is so threatening? On the one hand, it's only sex. On the other hand, it's sex. What is it that trips people up, makes them blind, makes them something, makes them beat themselves up, makes them cut themselves, like you're saying, in this way that is not let's say releasing energy, but harming themselves? What is it? What's the sexual side to it? That's what Freud was trying to talk about. Now, I think he got it wrong a lot of the times, more than he got it right. But what was interesting about it is that he was really the first that tried to suggest that there is an analytic to this. And I keep stressing that word because I don't really want to call it science, because that makes it sound a bit dry. And we are talking about sex here. And whatever else it is, it's not dry. Well, you know what I mean? I mean, it's not, you know, in a box, literal, point for point literal. So what is it about the sexuality and getting in tune with your body that is so scary for civilization? What's the problem? Why doesn't it work? Supposing it could be otherwise, why isn't it? It's not that difficult to think that it could be otherwise, and it just isn't. You know, sometimes I'm amazed when I look around and I think, God, you know, you never have thought there was ever a feminist movement with the bullshit that goes on now. It's just incredible to me, you know. And yet, we got close, and it's like, slid right back down the pole, you know, like, got it, back down the pole. Why does that happen? So, certain people will argue, like the Erich Fromm's The World, or the Reich, R-E-I-C-H, I can't even, is it Eric Reich as well? I think they're both Eric. Anyway, the two Erics. This whole mass psychology of fascism, fascinating to read. Then there's a guy named Giovanni, G-I-O-V-A-N-N-I, Giovanni Gentile, G-E-N-T-I-L-E, pardon me, who wrote this book called The Theoretic Basis of Fascism. He's a fascist. I mean, so he wasn't writing it with a critical eye. He was writing it as, this is what you need to read. So two books that came out at the same time, Mein Kampf and Gentile's work. And both of them were blown up, apparently, in the British Library when the bombs hit. It's fascinating. By the way, if you ever go to the British Library, well, nowadays they probably have a copy of it, but, you know, not that long ago when the British Library was not located in the thing that looks like a teaching hospital, but it was actually located in the British Library, I mean the British Museum, you'd get a little piece of paper saying, sorry, this was blown up in the, this has been missing since World War II when the bombs hit. Anything on fascism. It's fascinating, or most things on fascism. So Giovanni Gentile, there's another guy who wrote a book called, his name is George Sorel, or Georges, Georges, Georges Sorel, S-O-R-E-L. He wrote a book that said, it was called something violence. I can't think of the name. It basically what he argued is that the only way to get things done is through violence. And if you think otherwise, you're an idiot. It was, I forgot, it was actually a phrase, I can't believe I can't think of it now. And he also coined the very famous phrase, the more things change, the more things remain the same. This is Sorel. A lot of people, now, so you start thinking to yourself, what is it about the I don't mean the irrational, I mean the non-rational, the sort of irrational. What is it that when you're not thinking 100% what's counting, you know, one foot in, how is it that it just keeps creating the same old, same old? And Freud said, well, here's how it happens. You can't get away from the superego. Too much repression, you create a dictatorship. Too expensive on the whole. You can't trust anybody as well, especially if you are the dictator. At some point, it's a problem because you got to pay too many people to be quiet, and they kind of fall apart. But that often can take a long time. So normally, in normal society, there is a certain level of repression that's required for the society to take over, and that first and foremost is sexual. And the second version is gendered. The but the very first version of it is sexual, and that's what Freud is talking about. He basically says everybody is bisexual. That's what he starts with. There is no gender. In fact, he doesn't even say bisexual, he says polysexual, which you gotta hand it to him. I mean, the drugs he was on, he's like, yes. You know, so everyone is polysexual. You're born with having every part of your body sexual. Hence, the oral phase is so significant. And you don't get out of it very well, especially for those of you that are still smoking.
I wasn't smoking then. It's like little 1-year-old me.
You were. Let me tell you. And the Grace Jones song, you know, from what's that? The From the Bottle to the Grave. You know her song? That's all about the well, about anger and violence, but this whole relationship of how one deals with this. So how does the sexual enter your own work? It does. I'm not asking you why does it. Let's just get past that. It does. How does it? How does it enter it? So however you're thinking it enters it, that's the analytic we're talking about. However you want to think about how to address it, that's our problem, because Freud threw down the gauntlet. And you're right, it's not perfect. In fact, it's so not perfect, you almost feel like crying. So that's what I'm asking you to think through. When you're thinking about the dreams, when you're thinking about the jokes, how the unconscious works, you know, why is something, you know, coming to a different culture, or anybody who's not from this culture and comes here and listens to some of the jokes, you just think, wow, that's just horrific. You know, I used to go to some of these theater shows, and it was all about getting spanked, but not interesting spanking. I mean, like spanking and shitting, and you just think,
That was German.
it is almost German. You know, I mean, but it was really shocking to me. What the butler saw, Joe Orton, it's all very, you know, and it's supposed to be hilarious. And I was like, okay, I'm waiting for the joke, you know, I haven't found it yet. Gone on with that. People go over to the States, same problem. You know, like, why is that funny? It's horrific. It's stupid. Or it's very stupid, you know.
I had a German tutor at uni, and he was a kind of specialist in the Weimar Republic. And he did Bertolt Brecht, and he used to sit there and laugh through our tutorials as he read it, and we all sat there completely blank-faced, like, it's really not funny, and he would just kill himself laughing, and we just didn't get the joke at all.
Yeah.
And he'd say, Brecht is funny, he's so funny, listen to this, and they'd read it out, and we'd all go, okay.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
it just didn't translate at all, and I never knew Brecht was funny. We always do Brecht like, well, Mother Courage is all really serious, but they're all pissing themselves laughing.
Yeah. So that's important to get a sense of. So where does the analytic come into that question? Yeah.
I do think it's kind of interesting that Freud makes, by making sexuality like the like main repressive thing in any society, you create an automatic othering of yourself, in the sense that you create this is the secret. Sex is the secret. Everything's peddled as sex, but sex is still your secret because yours is an inappropriate sexuality no matter what sexuality it is.
Yep, exactly.
What a great way of control.
Yeah, absolutely. Got it in one. Exactly right. Yeah, and so that is how this is operating as an analytic. You want to repeat that in case people didn't hear? Because that's really important. That is how, if you can just restate it, try to.
Yeah, that if you make sexuality, anybody's sexuality, regardless of what your orientation is, your gender is, if you make your sexuality the secret that you can't share with other people, then you're automatically controllable because everybody's is too scary to mention.
And so the question becomes, who's the you that's doing this? And Freud's answer is, it's the superego. And it's very important to understand how the and it's not in you, it's projected, it's a social thing. This is raining now. Thank you, Freud. He's weeping tears of joy. Thank God it's Freud. Okay, that's it. So next week, we start with Hegel. It's pronounced Hegel. Okay, not Hegel. Well, it could be probably Hegel. But
No, it's E, isn't it? H-E, so it comes
Yeah.
behind.
no, exactly. I'm just saying. No, I just, never mind. I just, please try and say it right. I mean, not that I get it right, because God knows. But anyway, and what we're going to do next week, so just so you have it in your mind. So I'm trying to do this kind of weird stitching thing, so you get this going on here. We'll do a little bit of a summary of where we are now, including this bit, and the secret, and the Kierkegaard, and so on and so forth. And then, here's what I want you to think about. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was going to be so long. When you think about linear in a straight line, don't think just line. Remember when we were doing telos? So it can be a spiral, it's just that it's continuous. So whatever is continuous, continually linked, that's linear. But the catch is that the linear can have two sides. The linear, anything that's continuous can have discrete elements in it. Like, for example, when you think about a telos and you're going to get your MA, and your MA comes back around to give you meaning, and you go, and then you have all your different steps in between to get your MA, going partying, going to the seminar, having your, studio visits. These are all very discrete elements that make up the process that is a continuous process that's still linear. So just because they're discrete moments doesn't mean you're getting out of the linear. It's very hard to get out of a linear moment. Okay, so Hegel is the first to try and get beyond linear. And he does it in a way that is kind of surprising. So if you can just read, there's one section, I think it's in the very beginning in the introduction on what is here. What does it mean to be here? Right here. That's what we're going to look at. Where does the here exist? It's like going into these, for those of you who've traveled, going to these different countries, and it says, you're here. It's like, oh, God, I know I'm here. I don't know where here is, though. That's fun. Okay, so it's like that kind of, I just want you to concentrate on here. And know that here could also be this singularity. The singularity. Okay? Yay. Okay, that's it. I'm tired. Because now it started raining, now we can leave.
Thank you.
Good. Oh, sorry, it's a shame that Leslie wasn't here. I meant to show you this, but I covered it up. She brought this book to show around. I don't know what happened to her. It's by Sophie Kelly. Have you seen this? It's on Freud. It's called Appointment. And it's a fantastic book. It's on her relationship to Freud, Sophie Kelly. So if you want to take a look at it, it's on here. I meant to show it earlier, sorry.